Okay, so today we're going to be diving into a really interesting document, one that I think is pretty pivotal in the history of radical feminism, the Redstockings Manifesto.
Yeah, definitely a key piece of feminist thought.
Came out of the Redstockings group
In New York City.
back in July 7th, 1969, so quite a while ago.
Yeah, a while back.
And our goal today is to really try to grasp their core arguments
Right.
about what they saw as the fundamental oppression of women. And really, our main source today is the manifesto itself.
Right.
So we'll be focusing on that.
Right off the bat, the manifesto hits you with this very strong argument.
Yeah.
Women are an oppressed class. And they don't mean like just in a few little areas here and there.
Right.
They viewed this oppression as total.
Yeah, comprehensive.
Impacting every single part of a woman's life.
Absolutely no holds barred.
Yeah, and they get very specific about it, too.
Yeah.
They talk about exploitation as sex objects, women being forced into breeding unpaid domestic labor, cheap labor.
It paints a pretty stark picture.
It does. It's a very strong statement.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they don't see this as some sort of like, just an accident of history.
Right.
That, this is just how societies develop.
Yeah. Some unfortunate byproduct.
No, they make it very clear in the manifesto that this subordinate position of women is maintained by the threat of physical violence.
Right.
So it's a really powerful assertion about, where this imbalance comes from.
Yeah, it really reframes the conversation, doesn't it?
I think so.
Because it pushes back against the idea that a woman's struggles are just like her own personal bad luck, or her own fault even.
Right, exactly.
The Redstockings really argue that a woman's relationship with her oppressor, and they use that term, is inherently political.
Yes.
And demands a collective response, not just individual women trying to figure out how to cope.
Right, like self-help is not going to cut it.
Yeah,
in their view.
So they saw individual solutions as ultimately insufficient for what they considered such a deep and systemic problem.
Yeah, they're really focused on the need for shared understanding and united action.
So if that's kind of the problem, then who did they identify as this oppressor?
Very directly, men as a class.
Right.
Their argument is that men benefit from and actively maintain this power imbalance through all of our institutions, political, economic, cultural, all of them. And these institutions are ultimately backed up by the threat of force.
Right.
So it's like there's always that potential there.
The potential is there, yeah.
What I think is particularly interesting is this idea that all men, regardless of their intentions, benefit from something called male privilege.
Yes.
And therefore they participate in the oppression of women. So it's not about, are you a good guy or a bad guy?
Right.
It's about the system that you're a part of.
Right. And they weren't buying any excuses either.
No, not at all.
The manifesto specifically rejected attempts to shift responsibility for the oppression away from men onto, like, institutions or even to blame women themselves.
Yeah, the women are their own worst enemies kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't having it.
No way.
The idea that men are somehow forced to be oppressors was just, like, totally dismissed.
Right. It's like you have a choice.
You have agency, yeah.
And what about the women who seem to be consenting to this system?
Right.
Well, their argument was that this consent isn't true freedom. It comes from all these societal pressures.
Right. So it's not genuine.
Yeah, it's kind of like, what choice you really have if you've been socialized to think this is the only way to be.
And this, I think, really underscores their focus on the structural underpinnings of inequality.
Definitely.
Like, they were less interested in pointing fingers at individual bad guys and more interested in revealing these underlying power dynamics that are at play across society.
Yeah, like the whole system needs to change.
Right. The whole game is rigged, basically.
Exactly.
And another point that I think is so crucial is their absolute prioritization of women's lived experiences. They insisted that our own feelings and experiences have to be the foundation for how we analyze our situation.
Like, forget all these fancy theories.
Right. Forget all these pre-existing ideas.
If they don't ring true to what women are actually going through.
Exactly. To what women are actually experiencing.
Yeah. And that was a pretty revolutionary stance at the time.
It was.
To basically be saying, we are the experts on our own lives.
Right.
And we're not going to accept these explanations that don't align with our reality.
Yeah, any statement that didn't fit with individual women's experiences was automatically suspect.
Like, you got to check yourself.
Yeah.
If it's not matching up with what women are saying.
Okay, so if this oppression is so deeply entrenched,
Mm-hmm.
what did they see as the path forward?
Well, the manifesto states that the very first step is developing female class consciousness. And how do you do that?
Right.
Women sharing their experiences with each other.
So this act of sharing,
which came to be known as consciousness raising, wasn't just some therapeutic exercise.
Right.
It was a fundamentally political act.
Mm-hmm.
The way that women could recognize their shared oppression and build the solidarity they needed to challenge what they termed male supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important here to remember that male supremacy in this context refers to the idea that men are inherently superior to women and therefore should dominate all of society.
Right, okay.
So this consciousness raising was about breaking free from that mindset.
So who exactly is this movement for?
Well, they defined the best interest as the best interest of all women.
Okay.
But with a particular focus on those facing the most severe exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
They were very clear that they rejected any privileges that might divide women.
Right.
Whether it's based on race or economic status or anything like that.
Right, so not like an elitist movement.
Not at all. This was about fundamental unity.
Okay.
And they also stressed the importance of internal democracy within the movement itself.
Mm-hmm.
Every woman should have an equal voice.
Okay.
Equal opportunity to participate, take on responsibility.
Right, so it's about empowering women.
Exactly, to develop their political capabilities.
Okay.
So it's not just about fighting the external enemy.
Right.
It's about building a new kind of society within the movement itself.
So ultimately, the manifesto is a really powerful call to action.
It is.
Urging all women to unite in this fight against male supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because they weren't focused on like small incremental changes.
Right.
They really prioritize the complete liberation of women.
Yeah, in every area of life.
Yeah, anything short of that direct challenge to male supremacy was just seen as not enough.
Yeah, insufficient.
So in essence,
The Redstockings Manifesto provided a truly radical analysis.
for its time,
Absolutely.
characterizing women's oppression not as just these isolated incidents, but as a deeply rooted systemic issue driven by male supremacy.
Yeah, and they really hammered home the necessity of collective action.
Yeah.
Grounded in the authentic experiences of women.
Right. It really makes you think about, you know, how does this perspective on power articulated over half a century ago still resonate with or maybe even challenge our understanding of gender inequality today?
Right. Big questions.
Yeah, something to ponder after this deep dive.
Definitely.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time. See you later.